I'm about to tell you about a woman who spent 30 years building a business from scratch, convinced that her name on the door meant something, until the morning she found out it never did. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments, so what's the hardest thing about watching someone you love choose money over you? The shop on Magnolia Street had been in our family since before I could walk. My grandmother started it as a small alterations and tailoring shop out of a double-wide space between a laundromat and a shoe repair place. By the time my mother took it over in the late 80s, it had grown into something real. Custom dressmaking, bridal alterations, a small but loyal clientele that stretched across 3 counties. The sign above the door read Aldine's, which was my grandmother's name, and nobody ever changed it. Even after she passed, I grew up in the back of that shop. I did homework on the cutting table. I learned to thread a needle before I learned to ride a bike. When my mother got sick for the first time, I was 19 and already managing the weekend appointments by myself. When she recovered, I stayed. It never really occurred to me to leave. I was 31 when she sat me down and told me she wanted to make it official. "You've been running this place as much as I have," she said. "It's only right." We went to a notary together. She added my name to the business registration. I signed where she pointed. We celebrated with pie from the diner 2 doors down, and she cried a little, and I thought that was the beginning of something solid. What I didn't know was that a business registration and a deed are 2 entirely different things. I didn't find out until my uncle showed up. My mother's younger brother Philip had moved to Phoenix years ago to work in real estate. He came back to town about twice a year, usually around the holidays, always with the same energy, loud, backslapping, full of opinions about things he didn't fully understand. My mother loved him the way you love someone you grew up with, which is to say with patience she would not have extended to almost anyone else. He arrived on a Thursday in late October, unannounced. I was in the middle of a fitting when I heard him come through the front door. I heard my mother's voice go warm and bright the way it always did when he walked into a room. I finished pinning the hem I was working on, excused myself, and came out to say hello. He barely looked at me. He was already at the counter, leaning on it with one elbow, talking to my mother in a low voice that stopped when I stepped into the room. The 2 of them had that particular stillness of people who had just been interrupted mid-sentence. "Nadia," he said. "Good, you're here." I hadn't been called by my name by him in years. He usually called me kiddo, the way adults do when they want to remind you that no matter how old you get, you'll always be younger than them. "What's going on?" I asked. My mother looked at the fitting room door, then at the floor, then at me. Philip set a folder on the counter. I recognized it immediately. It was the kind of folder real estate people carry. Thick, color-coded, tabbed. He flipped it open and turned it to face me. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said, "and we think this is the right time to sell." I stared at the papers without touching them. There were property assessments, comparables, a projected sale price that made me feel briefly lightheaded. The building on Magnolia Street appraised at significantly more than I had ever thought about. "Sell the building," I said. Not a question, just repeating it to hear how it sounded. "The market is strong right now," Philip said. "It won't stay this way. We've already had 2 developers reach out expressing interest." I looked at my mother. "You want to sell the shop?" She didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. "I'm tired," she finally said. "And Philip thinks, I'm asking what you think." She looked at her hands. "I think maybe it's time." I waited for her to say more. She didn't. "And what about me?" I asked. "I'm on the business registration. I've been here every day for 12 years. Philip tapped one of the pages in the folder. "The business registration doesn't give you rights to the property itself. Your name isn't on the deed." The room was very quiet. "What?" "The building," he said, patiently, like he was explaining something to someone slow. "Your mother owns the building. You're listed as a co-owner of the business entity." Those are 2 different things. I looked at my mother again. She still wouldn't look at me. I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I remember the feeling, a cold dropping sensation somewhere behind my sternum, like the floor had shifted without moving. I remember telling them I needed a minute. I remember walking out the back door into the alley where we kept the overstock and the extra dress forms, and standing there in the October air until I could breathe normally again. I had given 12 years to that shop. I had turned down a position at a design firm in Atlanta to stay. I had taken out a personal loan to replace the industrial sewing machines when they broke down, and paid it back slowly over 3 years without asking my mother for anything. I had believed, without ever examining the belief too closely, that the shop was mine in every way that mattered. Standing in that alley, I started to understand that what I believed and what was true were not the same thing. I went back inside. I told them I wasn't ready to make any decisions that afternoon. I told my mother we needed to talk privately. Philip looked like he wanted to argue and then decided against it. That night, my mother and I sat at her kitchen table, and for the first time in a long time, we talked past the surface. She said Philip had been working on her for 6 months. He'd visited in April, in July, and then in October. Each visit, he'd brought more paperwork, more projections. He told her she was sitting on an asset that was only growing more valuable, and that holding on to it out of sentiment was a mistake. He told her she'd earned the right to retire somewhere warm. He had a condo complex in Scottsdale picked out. He'd already looked into it. He means well, my mother said. Does he? She didn't answer. Mom, I leaned forward. That shop is my livelihood. It's my whole livelihood. If you sell it, where does that leave me? She looked at me with the expression I had seen her wear my entire life when she was about to say something she knew would land wrong. You could come to Arizona. I sat back. You want me to leave my home and follow you to Arizona? I just meant. I know what you meant. We sat in silence for a while. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. I built something there too, I said. Not just you. I built a client base. I built relationships. Those people come because of me, not just because of the name on the sign. That has to count for something. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. I know it does. Then don't do this. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She squeezed my hand and then got up to make tea, and we didn't talk about it again that night. Philip left 2 days later. Before he did, he pressed a business card into my hand, someone he knew in commercial real estate, and told me that if I wanted to talk through my options, he was happy to facilitate. I put the card in the trash the moment he was out of sight. What I did instead was make an appointment with an attorney. I hadn't told anyone. Not my mother, not my best friend, not the woman who had been renting the front window of the shop to display her jewelry for the past 4 years. I went alone on a Tuesday afternoon, during the 2-hour window I had between my last appointment and close. The attorney's name was on a shingle above a second-floor office 3 blocks from the county courthouse. She was in her late 50s, no nonsense, with a legal pad and a ballpoint pen, and the kind of listening face that made you feel like your problem was already being sorted before you finished explaining it. I laid everything out, the history of the shop, the business registration, the deed situation, what Philip had told me, what my mother had said. She asked me a few questions. She reviewed the documents I'd brought. Then she leaned back in her chair. The building deed is your mother's, she said. That's clear. But the business is a registered entity and you're a named co-owner with an equal share. If the business holds any assets, inventory, equipment, client contracts, a lease on the space, those assets are split. I thought about the sewing machines I'd paid for, the embroidery equipment we'd added 3 years ago, the commercial-grade pressing system. There's also something else worth looking at, she said. She turned one of the pages toward me. Has the business been paying rent to your mother for use of the space? No, I said. Never. She always says it was family. The attorney nodded slowly. That creates what's called an implied tenancy. If the business has been operating in the space with no formal lease for over a decade, and you're a co-owner of the business, you may have grounds to challenge any forced eviction. Or at minimum, to demand fair market compensation before vacating. I stared at her. Meaning? Meaning if your mother sells the building, the buyer takes it subject to the business's rights. Which means your brother-in-law, uncle. Your uncle's timeline isn't as clean as he's presenting it. She clicked her pen. He doesn't know what he doesn't know. I left her office with a folder of my own. My mother didn't sleep well that week. I could tell from the way she looked when I saw her. The particular tiredness that lives around the eyes when sleep hasn't come properly. I wondered if she was having second thoughts, or if she was trying to talk herself out of them. Philip had been calling her daily. She mentioned it once casually, the way you mention something you're pretending doesn't bother you. He's very excited about the Scottsdale place, she said. I know, I said. He texted me a link to the floor plans. She laughed a little, then she got quiet again. I watched her move around the shop that afternoon. Straightening bolts of fabric she didn't need to straighten. Adjusting dress forms that were already adjusted. She had spent 30 years in this space. I wondered if some part of her already knew what she was about to lose, even if she couldn't name it yet. I didn't tell her about the attorney. Not yet. 3 weeks after Philip's visit, my mother called me on a Sunday morning and told me she had made a decision. She had accepted a preliminary offer on the building. She said it quietly, like she was hoping the quietness would soften it. She said she was sorry. She said she loved me. She said she hoped I understood. I told her I needed a few days to think. Of course, she said. Take whatever time you need. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had spent those 3 weeks doing more than thinking. I had been back to the attorney twice. I had pulled 12 years of bank records, tax filings, business expenses, and equipment purchase receipts. I had documented every invoice I had personally paid, every repair I had personally authorized, every client relationship that existed because of my work and not just the shop's reputation. I wasn't trying to fight my mother. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy to frame it that way. The resentful daughter, the aggrieved co-owner, the woman scorned by her family. That's not what this was. I was trying to survive. The shop was the only thing I had built. If it disappeared out from under me without any acknowledgement, without any compensation, without anyone asking what 12 years of my life was worth, then I had to know that I could stand up for myself even when it was the person I loved most asking me not to. The Monday after my mother's call, a letter arrived at the shop via certified mail. It was addressed to the business entity, which meant it was addressed to both of us. I signed for it. It was a formal notice from the developer's legal team. It outlined the anticipated timeline for sale and possession, requested documentation of any business assets, and included language about voluntary vacation of the premises within 90 days of closing. 90 days. I read the letter 3 times. Then I made a copy, put the original in my file, and called my attorney. It starts now, she said. She sent a letter back within 48 hours. It was measured and professional, and it said, in polite but precise legal language, that the co-owner of the business entity retained rights that would need to be formally negotiated before any transfer of possession could proceed. It cited case precedents. It listed assets. It requested disclosure of the full sale agreement. The developer's attorney called my mother's attorney within a day. My mother called me that same evening. Nadia, she said, what did you do? Her voice wasn't angry. It was something closer to bewildered, the tone of someone who thought they understood a situation and has just discovered a room in it they didn't know existed. I protected myself, I said. The same way you would have. Silence. Philip is very upset, she said. I imagine he is. He says you're making this harder than it needs to be. I thought about 12 years. I thought about the loan I took out for the sewing machines. I thought about the Saturday I came in at 6 in the morning to finish a wedding gown because the bride's mother had cried on the phone the night before, and I had stayed until it was perfect, and then I had gone home and slept 3 hours and come back the next day without telling anyone it was difficult. I need him to understand that my signature isn't automatic, I said. I need you to understand that. Another silence. This one longer. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I know. I thought. She stopped. I thought you'd understand. You're young. You can start over. The words landed in a way I hadn't expected. Not because they were cruel. She meant them cruelly. But because she had looked at everything I had built and seen something temporary. Something I could simply fold up and carry somewhere else. I'm not starting over, I said. I'm asking to be treated fairly. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was smaller. What is it you actually want, Nadia? Compensation for the business assets I personally paid for. A formal acknowledgement of my stake in the client base and operational value I built. And time, not 90 days, but enough time to relocate the business properly, find a new space, and give our clients a real transition. That's all. That's all. She was quiet again. I could hear the television in the background at her house. The evening news, the same anchor she'd watched every night for 20 years. Let me talk to Philip, she said. Okay, Nadia? Yeah, I'm proud of you. I want you to know that. Even right now. I didn't know what to say, so I just said goodnight and hung up. Philip did not take it well. I heard about it secondhand. My mother told me in a careful, edited way, the way she'd always relayed family conflict, smoothing the sharpest edges without fully hiding them. He had called her 3 times in one evening. He told her she was letting sentiment override good sense. He told her I was being manipulative. He told her the developers had other options and wouldn't wait forever. What he didn't know, and what my attorney had confirmed, was that the particular site had been identified as a priority acquisition because of its zoning and corner placement. There were not, in fact, other options that were equivalent. He had been presenting urgency as a negotiating tool, and once the developer's own counsel became involved and the legal complexity of the situation became clear, the artificial deadline began to soften. My mother called him on something. I don't know exactly what she said, but she told me later, simply, I told him to let the attorneys handle it. It took 6 weeks. There were 3 formal negotiation sessions, all conducted through our respective lawyers. My attorney was thorough and patient, and never once made me feel like I was asking for too much. By the end, the settlement included fair market compensation for all business assets I had personally invested in, a 12-month notice period before I was required to vacate the space, and a formal right of first refusal if the developer ever decided to lease the ground floor retail space to an independent tenant. It wasn't everything, but it was real. It was documented. It had my name on it. On the day the final paperwork was signed, I drove home through a part of town I don't usually take. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I just needed the extra 20 minutes. I went past the park where I used to eat lunch when the shop was quiet, past the hardware store where I bought my first set of proper fabric shears, past the coffee place that knew my order before I opened my mouth. This was my city. I had built a life here in the ordinary, unglamorous way that most lives get built. One decision at a time, one investment at one person at a time. I was not going to let it be erased without a record. My mother left for Arizona in February. I helped her pack. We spent 2 days going through the house she had lived in for 27 years, sorting what she would take and what would go to donation, and what she'd leave for me, and we talked more in those 2 days than we had in the past 2 years. She told me she'd been scared. Not of getting old, she said, but of becoming a burden. Philip had framed the sale as freedom, and she had wanted to believe him because she was tired in ways she hadn't known how to explain. I didn't think about what it would cost you, she said. We were wrapping her good dishes in newspaper sitting on the kitchen floor. I kept telling myself you were resilient, that you'd land somewhere. I am resilient, I said. But resilient people still need to be treated fairly. She looked at me for a moment, then she nodded once. She cried at the airport. I cried in the car on the way home. The shop on Magnolia Street closed its doors 6 months after that. Not because it failed. Because I found a space 4 blocks away, above a florist, with better light and lower rent, and I moved every bolt of fabric and every dress form and every machine I owned, and I opened the doors again under a new name. I called it Aldine's, continued. A few clients didn't follow me. Most did. Some new ones found me through word of mouth, which is how the good ones always come. I still talk to my mother every Sunday. She calls from Scottsdale, where the sun apparently shines 300 days a year, and she is learning to play pickleball, which I find both surprising and completely in character for her. Philip and I don't speak, but I don't carry any particular bitterness about it. He was doing what he thought was right. He just didn't think far enough. On a Thursday evening, a few months after the move, I was closing up the new shop alone. The last client had left. The machines were quiet. I was going through the week's invoices at the work table when I came across a photograph that had been sitting in the bottom of a box I hadn't fully unpacked. It was a picture of my grandmother standing in front of the original Aldine's, taken sometime in the 1970s, before the sign was even painted properly. She was squinting into the sun and smiling like she had just gotten away with something. I propped it up on the windowsill. She had built something from nothing in a town that didn't make it easy for her. My mother had kept it going through lean years and hard years and years when it probably didn't make sense to keep going, and I had kept it alive when it could have ended. None of us had done it by asking permission. I locked up the shop and stood on the sidewalk for a moment before heading to my car. The florist downstairs had left a small pot of something on the front step, yellow flowers. I didn't know the name of them, the kind that looked cheerful without trying. The streetlight was on. A couple walked past holding hands, not paying attention to anything but each other. I thought about my grandmother's face in that photograph. About the way she was smiling. I didn't want the building. I had never wanted the building. What I wanted was for the thing we'd built together, my grandmother, my mother and me, to survive, and it had. Not because anyone handed it to me, because I had known its worth when someone else forgot to look. Before you go, leave a comment and let me know. Have you ever had to fight for something that was already yours? And share this with someone who needs a reminder that what you've built doesn't disappear just because someone stopped seeing it.